Good evening to those bored enough to watch. Last year, Sonic Superstars released. It was a game that I didn't play on release but did end up buying sometime later when I found it on sale at a shop I happened to be at. When it comes to this game, I always find myself having a lukewarm or decent experience with it. I don't think that this is a bad thing, as I don't believe that every game that comes out needs to blow me away. As long as I have fun with it and leave with a decent experience at best, then that's enough for me. This isn't me saying that people who dislike this game don't have the right to do so. Everyone has their reasons to like or dislike a game, and it's not my position to tell you if you're right or wrong. In this video, I simply want to give my critiques and compliments with this game and why I would recommend it. So, with that said, let's discuss Sonic Superstars. The game begins on the North Fall Islands with Eggman handing a character named Fang payment for capturing the animals of the island. Another newly introduced character by the name of Trip is introduced here too, but she won't be of much significance until later. Eggman hands Fang a crudely drawn picture of some sort of creature and instructs him to find it. Before himself and Trip leave, an alarm goes off which indicates that Sonic is arriving. Sonic Superstars consists of 11 zones, most of them having 2 acts each, with a few having 3 or only 1. With a few exceptions, the first act of every zone will have a mini-boss that you need to fight before advancing into the second, which is where you fight the main boss before moving on to the next zone. At the beginning of the game, the main story only allows you to play as Sonic, Tails, Amy or Knuckles, with one other character being unlockable at the end. It's worth noting that regardless of who you pick, the main story gives you the chance to play as each character in optional acts specific to them throughout, meaning if you choose to do them, you'll always play as each character at least once. Bridge Island is the first zone of the game. For me, it does a good job at being an introductory zone of the game that gives the player a basic idea of the gameplay and its structure. The first act of the game sees you running away from a giant robotic fish at the end of the level. The second act sees you fighting Eggman in one of many boss fights you'll have with him throughout the game. Before moving on, I want to briefly discuss the other characters. For my playthrough of this game, I picked Sonic, who felt decent to control. He has the ability to use the drop dash, which is ideal for quickly picking up speed while moving, unlike the spin dash, which requires you to stop before using it. None of the other characters in the game are as fast as Sonic. Tails has the ability to fly, which can allow you to skip large distances of a level by using it accordingly. Knuckles has the ability to glide, which can be used for traveling large distances in levels. He also has the ability to climb walls as well. Amy has the ability to double jump, which can be ideal for a wide variety of things, whether it be adjusting yourself in the air or when trying to quickly traverse the levels. One of the many details I like about this game is that regardless of who you play as, you can see other characters in the background in a lot of stages, emphasizing the idea that everyone is making their own way to their destination. It's a small detail, but one that I appreciated. Speed Jungle is the second zone of the game. The boss will attack you by trying to rain blue spheres down upon you, which you'll need to dodge and wait for it to shoot its grappling hook for a mouth in order to attack. If you know where to look in some of the levels, you can find these portals that allow you to skip chunks of the level. In my experience, I mostly found them on complete accident, but nonetheless I did find it was a nice detail worth mentioning. Speed Jungle has an optional act where you play as Sonic, who gets chased through the jungle by Fang. The second act sees you fight against Eggman once more. Attacks that allow you to hit him include one where he aims a grappling hook at you, in which you need to move around and attempt to manipulate its trajectory and use that to hit him. He also has an attack where he shoots missiles at you, in which you need to aim and hit the blue one back at him to deal damage. Sky Temple is the third zone of the game. It has one act, and the boss fight with Eggman here sees him breaking the ground and throwing things at you while you fall. You need to wait for the game to let you platform on pieces of debris towards him where you can then deal damage. He'll also do an attack where he breaks pieces of debris by landing onto it, which you need to dodge and then hit him. Pinball Carnival is the fourth zone of the game. The first boss will use electricity and bombs to attack you. In order to stun him, you need to flip the sigil seen in the arena in order to attack. In the second act's boss fight with Eggman, he'll send bombs in a wheel to try and hit you. If you wait for the wheel to be empty, you can jump inside and aim your trajectory towards Eggman to deal damage. He'll also do an attack where he'll summon flying objects to throw at you, although you can still hit him if you aim for the bottom of his Eggmobile. Lagoon City is the fifth zone of the game, where the first boss will mainly attack using electricity and spawning other robots to attack you. There's an optional act in this zone where you play as Amy as she runs into a distressed Trip and guides her back to safety. Back with Sonic, you'll fight Eggman, who'll flood the arena. You'll have to climb to the surface where you can then attack him. Sand Sanctuary is the sixth zone of the game. It only has one act, and the boss fight with Eggman sees him shooting platforms and robots at you. With the latter, you can hit the blue ones back at him to deal damage. You'll also move to the foreground of the map, in which you'll need to dodge his attack and then deal damage whenever the possibility arises. Press Factory is the seventh zone of the game. I found it to have an interesting mechanic where it uses the background to impact the stage's foreground. In Act 1, everything will jump to the impact scene in the background, which can either hinder or aid you. This is is because if you time yourself correctly, you can use it to your advantage to reach platforms of the stage. Although if you time yourself poorly or it just happens at an inconvenient time, it can also result in loss. The first act's boss will swing in the background and try to crush you, but you need to dodge and wait for him to pass his electric attack in the foreground for an opportunity to deal damage. The second act changes things. The zone is in complete ruin and the background will now display a timer that will blow up the stage and result in a loss if it reaches 0. To prevent this, you need to find and press a button in numerous points of the level to reset the timer. To me, this was an interesting level gimmick, as it keeps one engaged with the level in two ways, keeping an eye on the foreground and the many obstacles in your way as well as the background because of the timer. I also like the challenge of having to find the next button to press it if the timer goes off. The boss fight with Eggman sees him trying to crush you, in which you need to maneuver around the obstacle he uses to do so and hit him whenever possible. Golden Capital is the 8th zone of the game. The first boss sees you needing to position yourself correctly so that you can hit the pink weak spot on its back. There's an optional act in this zone where you play as Knuckles, where at the end he unlocks a mural which houses the Chaos Emeralds yet to be collected by the player, although shortly after all 7 of them are stolen by Fang. At the end of the second act you fight him, where he unleashes projectiles, lava and many attacks upon you. This is where I want to talk about what I think is this game's worst aspect, the boss fights. I thought most of them were fine at best. The attacks were well choreographed which made them easy to understand and dodge. The ones that I don't like are the ones that have the boss in the background and the player doing nothing but dodging their attacks and waiting for them to come to the foreground for a possible chance to hit them. It really does slow down the pace of the game a lot, unintentionally I feel. I don't think that there's anything wrong with the boss being in the background if done well, but in this instance I feel as though there should have been more of a balance between moments where the player can hit the boss and moments when they can't. In this boss fight and many others, things tend to lean way too heavily on the latter scenario, where the player is just waiting around for an opportunity to attack. The only reason I can speculate that the game does this is due to the emerald powers. In this game you can collect the Chaos Emeralds, of which each one has its own emerald power associated with it. Some of them are useful for attacking, but not all of them are. Regardless, I believe that the boss fights in this game are the way that they are because if they were in the foreground at all times, you can almost skip entire boss fights by unleashing emerald powers such as the Avatar, which has multiple clones of your character run across the screen. This power has the potential to deal heavy amounts of damage, and for that reason I believe that the game has the bosses in the background of the level where none of the emerald powers can touch them. The problem I've discussed with these fights is present in this battle with Fang, but in my experience it is present in later boss fights as well, in some instances being even more prominent. After taking down Fang, he's cornered by Sonic, Tails, Amy and Knuckles. Trip arrives and tries to plead with Fang not to take the emeralds. Up until this point she'd been getting pushed around by him, and it's here that she finally decides to stand up for herself. She absorbs the power of the Chaos Emeralds and takes down the giant robot he was going to use against them. Cyberspace Station is the 9th zone of the game. It only has one act and the fight with Eggman has 2 phases. The first sees you needing to stay ahead of Eggman while dodging and attacking the robot. The second sees Eggman controlling the robot where you need to dodge more attacks and wait for a chance to deal damage. In this game you can collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds by entering a big ring found in the stages. After doing so, you play a minigame in which you need to swing to the emeralds via blue spheres while dodging any hindrances. You can swing to certain objects that boost you towards the emerald, and you can also collect rings to increase the timer if it's nearly at its end. For the most part, collecting emeralds was fairly easy, although there are a few stages that seem to be based more on luck, so enjoy restarting a stage multiple times in an attempt to retrieve it. Frozen Base is the 10th zone of the game. There's an optional act here where you play as Tails traversing through the area prior to your chosen character arriving. If you play through this act, you won't need to play through Act 1 as them, as the game simply cuts to them getting there to find Tails waiting with an Eggmobile he built. Act 2 takes place in the sky. You dodge and attack enemies before fighting 2 bosses at the end of the stage. Egg Fortress is the final zone of the main story. You infiltrate Eggman's base and make your way towards him. There isn't any boss fight at the end of the first act. Instead, your character goes to confront Eggman, who activates a machine that reverses time. As a result, the second act is the first but in reverse. The final boss fight is one of the worst aspects of this zone. There's 2 phases, both of which feel extremely drawn out. There aren't any checkpoints either, so if you die then you need to restart from the beginning. I wouldn't have as much of a problem with the lack of checkpoints between the 2 phases if they didn't take so long to complete, which is an issue that stems from the previously discussed issue of the game making you wait abnormally long for a chance to attack. After finally defeating Eggman, everyone escapes the fortress. Knuckles goes back to Angel Island while the others celebrate their victory, hence ending the main story. After beating the main story, you unlock the ability to play as Trip. You can do so in the main story's levels, although the more notable aspect of this edition is her own story. It basically amounts to her going through the main story and its levels again, but this time they're much more difficult. She has the ability to double jump and climb walls, and instead of fighting Eggman, you fight a robot in his place. Instead of Eggman being the final boss, Fang serves that role in Trip's story. Another thing worth noting is that a lot of the optional levels from the main story are mandatory for Trips. I've already talked about my issues with the boss boss fights earlier in this video, although the final fight with Fang somehow manages to make things worse. Trying to hold on to rings isn't as important in this fight. While it's always a good idea to have at least one ring on you, it won't be needed when majority of Fang's attacks lead to instant death. After beating the main story, Trip's story, and finding all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you can unlock the final story. As Super Sonic, you fight a dragon, in which you need to dodge attacks and wait for the right moment to attack. Like a lot of Super Sonic fights in this series, you need to maintain the amount of rings that you have, as if you reach 0, you'll have to restart. It's important to put emphasis on this, as this fight often puts you in situations where you won't be able to obtain any rings until later. This means that you'll need to use moves such as the dash sparingly, as it costs rings to do so. In order to collect rings, you need to collect them as they fall from the sky or from Tails or Knuckles who fly by from time to time. Touching their model also gives you a boost in rings, so they will be a primary source of obtaining rings. Anything you get from flying around can be considered maintaining the amount that you already have. Like a lot of previous fights in this game, this one is split into multiple phases with no checkpoints. If you lose at any point, then you need to restart from the beginning. One of the things I find strange with this fight is that the game goes out of its way to establish the fact that Trip has her own super form, yet you never actually get to play as her in this fight. I think it would have been interesting to be able to do so, perhaps controlling them both in the same manner that Sonic Adventure 2 allowed. It seemed somewhat like a missed opportunity to me, but regardless, after beating this fight, the game ends with the dragon being sealed away and the characters, excluding Knuckles as he probably went back to Angel Island, celebrating in unison, hence ending Sonic Superstars. A few things that you can do as side content include the battle mode, where you can play against NPCs or friends in a series of mini-games. Whoever gets the most points is declared the winner. There's also the time attack, where you can replay the stages with the incentive of beating them as fast as possible. Overall, I don't think that Sonic Superstars is a bad game. I think it has a lot of issues and even some missed opportunities in a few areas, although I had a decent experience with the game at best, and with the exception of some of its weaker aspects, I look back at the game and my experiences with it in a lukewarm manner. It didn't exactly blow me away in the manner that previous games akin to Sonic Frontiers did, but I don't think that every game that comes out needs to. So, with that said, with my critiques and compliments in mind, I can say that I would recommend Sonic Superstars. So, there's the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I've been wanting to make this video for quite some time now, but never really got around to it. With the game turning 1 year old, I decided to finally go through with doing so. If you want to view the list of games I want to make videos about in the future, then you can always do so through the link in the description. Additionally, if you want to follow me, then my socials will be linked in the description, as well as any afterthoughts or messages I may want to add. With that, I haven't really got much else I want to say, so I'll see you all in my next video. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening.